Time just 20 past 10. We're talking to Rod Bluh, the leader of the Conservative group and, of course, the leader of Swindon Borough Council. Rod, we were talking about budget cuts. The cuts do seem to have been incredibly cruel in a number of areas. We're seeing budget cuts on bus subsidies, massive budget cuts. Certain areas aren't going to have any service at all on Sundays. This is going to affect the poorest in the community, isn't it?
Well, let's start with the buses, because it's a really difficult one for people to understand. Essentially, the council has never supported those bus routes. So it's not about just cutting something, we just haven't got the money to replace. Because where those bus routes have come from that are being cut, essentially, is that when new developments are built, developers put in Section 106 contributions, developers' contributions, to start up a bus service that wouldn't be commercial otherwise. So there's a pot of money there to support that bus service in the hope that the usage builds up and makes it profitable. When that money runs out, it runs out. The council, given particularly at the moment in terms of its funding position, is not in a position to start then putting money that is never supported before into the pot. Now, I am very sensitive to the fact that that's fine from a financial argument, but that's not very helpful for people who can't get round on buses. But the essential argument here is if people want their buses to remain, more people have got to use them, because that is the only way that bus services can be maintained. The Thames Down Transport or Stagecoach are not going to run buses, essentially, that are not profit-making, because that's not their business model is not that great that they can afford to do that. So it's a really difficult one, and I do think we need some... One of the problems and one of the frustrating things in this country is we don't deal with public transport terribly well, in my book. Local buses is a big issue. And I don't know the answer to it, to be honest. And I think it's one that I think everybody needs to sit down and work out how we can find a new model for delivering bus services where they're needed.
Would you be willing, in terms of, you talked about that, about the finance sort of isn't there because of the cutbacks. We saw Thames Down, I think it was last year, combine, I think, 2 or 3 different routes in North Swindon because of the Section 106 money went. Would the council fully support discussions and sitting down trying to combine other routes as well?
I do think that, I mean, I keep speaking to Thames Down Transport because effectively we're the shareholder. We can't, as a council, we own Thames Down Transport, but we can't actually control it legally through the Transport Act. They're an independent body, so we only have a shareholding. So operationally, we have no say over what goes on. But we do have dialogue with them, and I keep pushing as to whether we've done all that we can strategically do to redo bus routes to try and fill in some of the gaps and to maintain the profitability. And they assure me that essentially that work is going on all the time. So it's difficult.
Rod, you confuse me there. You say we own it, but we can't influence their decisions.
No, there is.
But surely at a shareholders' meeting you have the opportunity to influence.
Yes, but the shareholder doesn't give you management rights, effectively, and the legislation is very clear.
No, but ultimately, if the managers are not doing what the shareholders
they are doing. They are doing, but we can't intervene in an operational sense. We can in a sort of a strategy direction sense as shareholders, and we do have shareholder panels and we do discuss some of the big strategic issues. But I am fairly confident that I believe they are doing a pretty good job, and it's a pretty good bus company. It's one of the best that there is in terms of its performance, its cleanliness, and it's a well appreciated service. But it seems to be the problem with buses is, I mean, it's a cultural issue largely. You speak to a lot of young people, particularly the ones that can't afford cars at the moment, and the answer is, well, we don't do buses. Somehow it's seen as something that's not quite trendy. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got a real issue with public transport to make it sort of acceptable. I think it's a terrible thing to say. You go to Europe and you see tram systems and you see all sorts of things going on and people love them. Come over here and somehow it doesn't seem to work. And I find that...
Well, it's not so much over here because London Transport is still very, very well supported by the London community. So something has gone wrong. I mean, the problem we're going to have here is, as we said, we have an ageing community.
Yes.
And it's that community that uses the buses.
Yes, and you would have thought with petrol prices and everything else, there might be an incentive for people to leave their cars at home. Biggest problem we have is that most cars in this country are parked outside the front door. You get people to go open their front door and walk past the car and leave it on the drive and walk to the bus stop, and you've cracked it. Because what do? You come out and you jump in your car. You don't think going by bus, do you?
So, as far as the council are concerned, not an awful lot more you can do about supporting it as best they can. There's no more money.
But there's no, we, as I say, we've never supported these routes because they've been done by developers' contributions, and for us to now be asked to find X million pounds to now support them is just a nonsense in our current financial envelope that is getting smaller all the time. So this is just one of those big issues that, given where, I mean, there is a big issue for me about the concessionary bus travel. I mean, I'm all in favour of it, but the government never funded it when they gave it to us. We've got about a 2 million shortfall. That 2 million would help us subsidise a lot of these routes.
Because isn't it for when the pensioner gets on the bus and they get given a ticket, the bus company only gets half of the normal fare revenue?
It's a whole. There has never been a direct correlation between what it costs and who funds it. Some money came down from government originally, but with all smoke and mirrors, we don't actually think existed. And effectively, we've been picking up the shortfall ever since. So this was a national scheme decided by a national government that's ended up being funded locally, and it's costing us about 2 million a year. And that's 2 million I would rather be putting in. If they fund it nationally and give us that 2 million, we'll put that back into local bus routes.
So, in your opinion, you would rather cut out the over 60s free bus?
No, I wouldn't cut it out because I think it's a good scheme, but I think the way it's being funded is grossly unfair, a national priority that's being funded locally.
You said there about the money just not being there for it, but on the opposite side of the coin, we've seen the council have cut the cost of car parking in the town centre to encourage people in and encourage business, which is good. But isn't that in a way saying that one way of getting somewhere is more equal than the other?
Well, I think the issue of car parking in the town centre was an economic imperative. It wasn't an easy decision to make. There was we had critics at the time that said throwing £500,000 or further £500,000 away in this crucial time was not the right thing to do, and we've been totally vindicated by the results. The footfall in Swindon has gone up dramatically. You ask the retailers, I think it's made a huge difference. Swindon has come out as one of the best performing retail centres in terms of the improvement over the last 12 months. So we're quite confident it was the right thing to do. I think the charges were out of kilter to the climate and the offering in the town centre, because let's be honest, we've got regeneration to do. We felt that it was just important that we showed that we were really on the side of the retailers and trying to support business in Swindon. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. And there is a report coming to Cabinet in June, I think it's June, which will lay out how we think that reduction what it's done, and we'll lay out some of the results, and we think it'll be a very positive report.
Regeneration, then.
Yes.
Where are we with that?
If you read the local paper, you might think we were all over the place, but actually the facts aren't quite as such. Regeneration has been quite difficult. Between when we started in 2004, there was no regeneration plans in place at all. We had a blank sheet. The new Swindon company had just been formed. There was areas on a map about what might go here, what might go there, but there was no plans whatsoever. Swindon should have done its regeneration. I've argued this repeatedly back in the 90s, when all the other towns around us were doing theirs, when the climate was good, there was plenty of money flowing. That was the time to have done it. And for whatever reasons, and I would blame the previous administration because I think it's a fact, they just didn't push it at the time. We're now playing catch up. We knew in 2004 a recession was likely any time soon. We didn't quite envisage the scale of the one about to come, but we knew we had to get on with it. And between 2004 and 2008, a huge amount of work was done. We got development agreements signed up on the Union Square Mews development. We got development agreements signed up on what was going to be the Modus retail scheme in Havelock Street. We got the one that was outside our control, but we had an interest in it through the car park. We got a planning permission and a development agreed for the college site. So we had three major schemes adding up to about £600-700 million all ready to go. And those development agreements, I mean, until you've actually been involved in one, you would not believe how long they take to put together. You have to assemble all the land. You have to. It is a 3-4 year job to do one of those agreements. But we got them in place. We had some of the public. We did Wharf Green. We had some of the other, like the paving in the town centre planned and what have you. So it was really got a head of steam behind it in a way that Swindon actually had never seen. Recession comes along, and frankly, the phone stopped ringing. Everything was on hold virtually overnight. Developers were paralysed because they couldn't borrow the money. I mean, if you're doing £600 million, somebody's got to lend you £600 million. And obviously with the banking crisis, there was no way that was going to happen. The viability of all those schemes went through the floor. There was no way they were going to raise the finance.